Welcome to the Cowboy Office Show, where you'll experience expert analysis and epic discussion on key pillars of the equine industry, including sports, business, hobby, and the horse lifestyle. Your co-hosts are Jody Brainerd and Brian Dykert, industry veterans with over 120 years combined living the cowboy lifestyle. The Cowboy Office Show will help you get involved, ask more questions, and create change. We'll keep riding for you as together we learn from the ride already ridden, learn to listen better to our horse, and make our industry better for all. Each episode will take a ride around the industry in less time than you can load the truck and trailer. Drop your email at cowboyoffice.com to receive updates and never miss an episode. Saddle up as we ride into today's show.
Hello, Horse World. We knew we were going to trip and stumble at some point in time, and lo and behold, here we are. This show is all about what happened at the NRHA Derby, where we are as an industry, and do we really know what we're doing? We have a detailed review of the NRHA Open Derby, as we'll address a few myths along the way about officiating on this ride. The stakes are high, returns are significant, and is the exhibitor getting their piece accurate and consistent? We'll let you decide. Welcome to the Cowboy Office. I'm Brian. Go to cowboyoffice.com, put your email in, come ride with us. Make sure you hit the subscribe button at the bottom of the platform that you watch us and enjoy.
I'm Jody. Welcome. The NRHA Derby was open to 4-year-olds to 7-year-olds of nominated horses. We saw 296 total entries in this year's Derby. Took 3 days to sort the go-around and find the cut lines. The purse payout for the Open L1 to L4 was $740,150.69. We saw 130 riders' positions occupy the purse payout across the 4 open levels. The 20-80 rule was in effect, right? In the Open Derby, it was 18.7 to 80. So that means that a few riders are taking most of the money, is what that 80-20 rule says. But the general buzz and the barn talk about the Open Derby, started after the second section of the go-around and continued through the finals. Brian?
Well, I wanted you to see, because you always talk about the 80-20 or 20-80 rule.
Right.
And you've always had that sense, and you had it for a very long time, and so I highly respect it. But we actually calculated it out for the Derby. So this isn't going to hold true across the entire industry yet, although we're going to kind of track it. But here
Sure.
it is. It's up on the screen. And the total purse, so here comes. Because what this shows you is a level 4 purse, which is right slap in the middle. $437,000 is what the level 4 purse was. So they paid that out to 35 places because they had 35 horses go to the finals with the ties. The entire 4 levels in the open purse was $740,000, $740,000. And they talked about it all week being a record year of purse. That's great. Well, if you take the 4 levels, level 1, 2, 3, and 4, that's 130 positions that earned money, and that's due to ties. You had 10 horses across those 4 levels that, because of the tie, they all took 30 plus ties. And when you look at the amount of that open purse that was then taken by the top percentage, it's 18 riders took the 80% of the purse. So that at your 80-20 rule, and you are so close, I was amazed at it. So that's the bottom line.
Cool. Yeah, that's a great piece of information to realize it's actually a little bit smaller than 20%, right? Woo! Yeah.
Yes, and as these purses go, and that's the whole point of, kind of what we're doing is looking at the real things and the facts and what's really going on. But that 80-20 is, it's right on it. So good for you.
Well, cool. Well, thanks. Like I said, I've been on both sides of that. I've got to be in the 20% and I've got to be in the 80% a lot more. So I get it, right? Yeah. Well, so tell me your thoughts about the talk that went through the Derby. We've been there before as monitors of those major events and of chairs of the judges committee. What were you thinking when the discussion?
Well, the buzz around this event, for whatever the reason, I'm not sure yet, but there was a lot of buzz around this event, and you didn't have to be there to hear it. So that's true. And what did they all get buzzing about was that the judging was out to lunch, bottom line. I'm using just generic barn talk, but the buzz from the beginning of the go-round after the go-round, on the way to the finals, where the judges were all over the place. And what they were talking about was the scores were high, accuracy of the scores. They saw a lot and we've got a lot of stats, and so we can go through it. So the buzz around the industry was, well, this isn't new news. In all of competition breeds. Exhibitors and fans have opinions about the outcome of competition. That's true. Well, that's true in our world too. But for whatever reason, this particular event provoked more buzzing and more talking around whether or not the officiating was accurate. Was it staying consistent? We had 3 days of go-round. The cut line moved. The scores did elevate across it. Yes, you got a lot of variables. We'll talk about those things along the way. The bottom line to it is, though, were the scores high? The answer is no, because the scores were very respectful to the depth and quality of what we've seen in our sport for the last 3+ years. So were they excessively high? No, they weren't. Are we going to look at a few details? And accuracy, consistency, standard is a big one. Because we used a 5-judge system, and we've got some stuff we'll show you, because did all 5 judges see this competition basically the same way, which would be the NRHA standard way? And my answer would be no. They saw it their individual way. And that was a big factor on what continually contributed to the audience and the exhibitors in trying to interpret it and figure it all out.
Absolutely, yeah. And I since I live here, and I, have lots of old clients and, professionals, peers, friends that are competing, and yeah, I got to hear all about it. Right? I mean, from a standpoint of, the past chair, and my phone lights up too, and it's like, what? And I said, whoa. First of all, that's not my department anymore, gang. So it's like, but I actually would tell them, I said, but we'll analyze it and we'll talk about it. I said, I said, I said, the answer is always in the middle, right? I mean, some people are going to get very, very defensive about it, and some people are, like I said, it's in the middle, and we've got some great stats and some great stuff to talk about that I think that can enlighten our viewing audience about what happened.
Well, the first one that I want to take you to is an overview of the stats on the go-round. And then we're going to waltz down it, because we have this broken down pretty good. We've got this whole analysis pretty standardized now. We'll be bringing the information to the audience in a very standard procedure. This is the go-round of this year's Derby. And this gives you an overview. So using the scale, there it is in the go-round. 296 entries, 3 days, and here it is. If you compare this to 2023's national stats, they're right on target with it. Plus 1.5 was used, 0.3% of all the maneuvers in the go-round, 296. 85% of all the maneuvers were marked between -half and +half. Again, right slap in what's normal. 7.4% of non-unanimous penalties were applied in runs. That's actually lower than the 23 national trend. So that's a good thing. And then you've got now, and this one's slightly lower because it was over 20% last year. 17.6% of all runs had maneuvers cross zero. That's the one that puts a thorn under your saddle pad all the time. And I agree with you. It does me too, because that's the one that it can't be bad and good at the same time. So what's going on? We know where the bubble is on zero, and that the correct score of zero catches a lot, and there's a distinct difference between the top of zero and the bottom of zero. But on the scorecard, you can't make that distinct decision. Does it happen? Yes. Is it happening way more frequent in today's time than it did 5 and 8 years ago? Yes, it is. So, that's that piece. Now I'm going to take you 2 more steps real quick. Is that okay?
No, move forward. Yep, it's good. Those are easy to understand.
This next one, and we'll come back to those because we're going to look at the go-round and the finals. This one is the cut line. And this cut line lets you look at the major events that we've had so far this year. Cactus Derby, Run for the Million qualifier, the NRBC, the 100X at Fort Worth, and then the NRHA Open. And so when everybody at the Derby is screaming that the scores are too high and they're marking them too high and all that stuff, the answer is actually no, that's not true. Is the competition deep? Is there more of them than there have been in the past? That answer is yes. But they weren't marking them any higher than where the industry is. And this shows you. So this lets you look at all 4 levels, lets you look at the cut line to make the finals and what the high score in the go-round was on the way to the finals. And then we can do this again as we get to the finals. But if you look at it was a 222.5 for level 4, 220.5, level 3, level 2, 217.5, level 1, 217. But then let me show you this one real quick, because when you summarize it and you put it together, and this lets you look at our industry. Now, this is the cut lines. And what we've done here is look at level 3 and 4 average cut lines across those events that we just talked about so far this year. So this is 2024. So by average, for level 3 and 4, the industry is at 220. The fact that it took a 222.5 to go to the finals at the Derby is not out of bounds. Total average cut, when you put all 4 levels together, there's your average as an industry. So 217.3, 217.5 for all 4 sections. When you average that out, that's where the industry is right now. And then your high scores. So it level 3 and 4, average high score, end of go round to make that cut line, 225.5. And we've been talking about a 225 to 230 for 3 years. You know, they had a 229.5. They had a pair of them tied at the end of the go round. So were they overly high? The answer is no. When you put all 4 levels together, the average high score in go rounds as you're trying to get qualified for finals is 223.3, which 223.5. That's what it is. Those are very detailed specifics, and when the general populace says that they feel or their perception is that the scores are getting way too high and way out of bounds, it's actually not true. So that's what that's kind of talking about.
Absolutely. You know, it's interesting, and you and I had even had to talk about this after day 1, but I went out to dinner with the Honstetters and some of their clients the night before the Derby started. Amy and I did, and I was, you know, and of course Arno, he's obviously very good hand, and absolutely aware of what's going on, and I had no idea what it took to make the Open finals last year. And I said, well, I think it's going to take it to 21.5 this year. I said a couple 4s and a 3.5. I said that was, you know, I mean, I said I think that's where we're going to go. And he said, no, it only took it to 20.5 last year to make the level 4 Open finals. I said, oh, I didn't know that. But I said, well, looking at some of these earlier spring shows and looking at, you know, the early show at Tulsa and looking at NRBC, and I thought, it's going to be a little bit higher. Then you and I talked about the conversation, and I said, yeah, well, I told Arno I thought I was going to take it 221.5, and at the end of the first day, it was like, whoa, maybe I was a little high on that one, because I think maybe a 216 was at the bottom of the top 30, maybe, or something like that after day 1. And I remember you going, just hang on, you know, no, don't get too carried away yet. And boy, was I wrong. You know, I mean, it went up from there, and like I said, we'll get into some of the reasons that perhaps it did, but obviously, you know, there's some good horses that did go to show. And I will tell you that as we get on this, just because I was out to dinner with Arno, and he was grumbling a little bit about having to go so early. I think he was, you know, very, very early draw that first day, and I think he was 223 or 3.5, and you know, I mean, and made it back to the 4 finals, which, you know, kudos to the guys who were sitting in the chair to recognize those early horses, because sometimes that's not easy to do.
Well, correct. And I think that that's a big one, because that statement alone tells you that they have quality officials, and the officials are in the chairs and they're doing the right job. I'm going to show you, and that's true. Two horses that made the finals were in the first 10 horses of the first section of the go-round. So the fact that they saw it and then they marked it, and then those horses end up making it to the finals, that is a big one. That says a lot, because the officiating is getting it right. Now comes Are they being consistent with that? The real question is, did the best 30 horses make it out of the go-round to go to the finals? And I'm going to just give you a simple number. And there's work to be done there. So I'm not going to offer our opinion, because you got to do some significant work to say, did the top 30 horses that were supposed to go to the finals? I can't answer that sitting here. What I do know is that you had 8 horses. It took a 222.5 to make the Open finals. True. There were 8 horses at 222. There were 6 horses at 222.5, which is what made up that tie to take 35 to the finals. If you took those 14 horses right on the bubble and went back and did further analysis, how well did we, and it's not about any person, it's not about an individual, it's about how our system works, and is our system sorting out the depth and the quality that our sport is now bringing to the arena. That's the real question, and that's where everybody is getting a little stuck, because they're not asking the right question. So let me show you this real quick. This is an interesting set of stats, and we haven't used this in our past, and I think we'll start with some of these aged events that have finals. This is the 3 sections of the go-round, and it's measuring a couple key statistical factors. Maximum, which is maximum score. So the top, it's first section's blue, second section's green, third section's brown or orange, whatever you want to call it, which is Friday, Saturday, Sunday of the go-round. Maximum score in that go-round. So you go from a 224 on Friday to a 229 on Saturday, second section, and then you had 229.5s in the third section. And median is midpoint. So half that draw is above and half that below. 213.5 in the first section, 217.5 in the second section, half a point difference, 218 for the third section. Was there a big distinctive difference between first section and second and third? The answer is yes. The top 30 cut line, and this just measured it while the go-round was going on. So at the end, you just made reference to it. The end of the first section, it was 216.5. And you and I had talked, and I actually said it looked weak. If that was representative of 300 aged horses, it looked like it was going to be a weak Derby. That's what it said to me. Didn't turn out to be that way. We just didn't see those horses were later in the draw. So at 216.5 was the cut line after Friday. 221.5 was your top 30 after Saturday, and then it moves to a 221.5, 222.5 by the end of the go on Sunday. So again, a 1 point deviation between second and third, but again, a big step between first section and second, third. And then the mode is the most frequent number in a data set. So the frequency, what's the most used number? That's the bottom line. That's what mode measures. This is measuring the final score, not all the individual scores, the final score. So 216.5 was the most frequently used score in the first section. 219 was the most frequently used in the second section. And a 221.5 was the most frequently used in the third section. So did the depth of competition in the draw go up? It says that. Did their scores go up? Yes, it says that too. There's work to be done to look at the accuracy of that, and I know a lot of people were talking about, because those 219 to 222 runs, depending on where you were, would have been more conservatively marked than some of the 223s, 224s, 225s that they saw, and that's where a lot of the industry kind of got to buzzing, yes?
Yes, absolutely. There's no question about that. And we've, in the past, both you and we've dealt with this, and I mean, that's one of the biggest things that, from a monitor's position that or even from the chair of the judges committee, even if you're out showing horses, but you're still aware of what's going on. But I think that's one of the biggest things that we try to avoid, because that's happened in the past. We know that it does happen in the past, and you've heard me say this a million times. Nobody does that on purpose, right? I mean, no judge says, "Well, I'm going to score low this morning. I'm going to score high this afternoon." It just doesn't happen that way. But there are ways to ensure that doesn't happen. But the only way to look at the data is after you would have your committee members go take those 220 to 222 runs, pick 20 of them out over the 3-day time period, mix them in random order, and say, here, mark these runs. And then you can analyze the data after that's over with.
But I would take you one more step, because do you leave that to the responsibility committee in today's time? And I'd say no. Do you have 100 great judges that are out there in the field marking these things, and could you get an independent marking analysis doing what you're talking about? And I would then say yes, and that's where that analysis would come from, and how you would best do it so that it was done in a true, unbiased, kind of fair way, and you could look at the accuracy of that. And the point to all of that is it's illustrating the depth and the volume, and that's not new news. So why did this get to be difficult? Because you had 300 of them. Bottom line. There's an interesting point that comes out of here, and this was one that you and I have tracked for 20 years, because when we used to do the work on the committee, and we were very active in there, and consistency is a big one. And it's very important. Accuracy and consistency. We would always follow, because it's normal. It's normal, and by reflex for officials it's like a rhythm. It's like a routine. So when you start marking a lot of really good runs, that gets to be easier to do as you go. And the key is resetting yourself to the NRHA standard. That's my view. The stat that's interesting is watching the draw. And when we talked about the NRBC, because they had 250 horses in 3 days of go-round, and the consistency across the go-round was some of the best we'd ever seen. It was actually phenomenal. So yes, it can be done. In this case, in the NRHA Derby's case, 34% of the finals, which is 1/3 of those finalists, all came from the last 25% of the second and third section. And that is a tendency that you and I and others used to spend some work on to keep that in check, because that's that reflex that if you let it get out of control, it can, right?
Absolutely. There's no question about that. That from and we've had significant discussion about this, you and I have, and we've talked about that monitor's position, the importance of it, and or just keeping your team at that consistent level. And I think, I always said from myself when I monitored, I would tell those judges that, it's not my job to tell you how to judge. You already know how to do that. You're going to go mark the horses. It's my job to make sure that you stay consistent and you finish the show the same way you started the show. And, like I said, that's been going on for years and years. And I think that, it was interesting. I also did a significant amount of work on the National Football League and their officiating crews, and they had done a study on what they called cognitive load, which was how much information they would hit their officiating crews with on film or tape work, and then on the live work. And what they determined was that if the tape work was intense enough and was, correctly viewed, that your brain couldn't tell the difference between the tape work and the live work. In other words, they would compare those studies. So in other words, you can significantly affect the way that people prep by showing them the right information. So, yeah, right. And it works the same way with the reigners too, for sure.
I always knew it's cool that you've done some of that research, because I've always assumed that several of the other professional sports that are far more advanced have got to be light years ahead of us on officiating, and especially when you got subjective calls. That's true. It's just one of the human elements. And so I'm always fascinated to hear that piece. I want to take you one more step, because age of horses, and I don't want to sidetrack us. We're going to stick with the details, but it was interesting in the Derby. And this looks at the Derby, the 100X, and the NRBC, because 100X was only 4-year-olds, and the NRBC is 4 to 7-year-olds, and the NRHA Derby was 4 to 7-year-olds, and they were completely flipped. So there was more 4-year-olds in the NRHA Derby than anything else. Now this is looking at age of horses in the finals. So when you look at the finals across those events, that's what you're seeing. And so 4-year-olds, 5-year-olds, 6-year-olds, 7-year-olds, there was 40% of the Open finalists in the NRHA Derby were 4-year-olds. 30% 5-year-olds, 17 and a half, 18% were 6-year-olds, 13% were 7-year-olds. And almost, you had 10% in the NRBC, which were 4-year-olds, 40% were 5-year-olds, and then 26% and 22% were 6 and 7-year-olds. I don't know what that means other than that's how the exhibitors are kind of managing their horses and where they are. The other piece that was very interesting was the fact that 4-year-olds, 2 4-year-olds won the level 3 and level 4. And then I think it was a 5-year-old was level 2 and a 7-year-old was level 1, and they were all studs. So
absolutely, yeah. That's a neat stat. I've often thought about that. Back in our day, it was either the Derby or the Super Stakes, and it was 4-year-olds only, right? And there were,
right.
there were no. And then, well, maybe we better add a few more horses, so we're going to give them another year or two. So then all of a sudden it goes, 4 to 7, and then my question is, what the hell's the difference between a 7 and an 8-year-old or a 7 and a 10-year-old? And well, obviously, it takes a long time. These horses are so good at what they're doing now, from the genetics, from the training techniques, sports medicine, everything that's being done. Obviously, they're not at that level. They can't last as long. But perhaps, at a non-pro level or a little bottom level, maybe there's room for an all-aged, Derby, right?
Yeah.
I would ask my viewing audience to tell me what they think about that, because
right.
I don't know why you couldn't show an 8-year-old, or a 9.
Right.
Just a question.
Well, yeah, and I hear you. Yes, and I think that's interesting. It'll be interesting to see if the industry steps up, because do we pull the 4-year-olds out and have them as a standalone? And is that kind of a transition into the mature? Maybe. And do we have enough volume? It appears as such, and 100X has proven it. I got one more that I know, because we've had a lot of feedback on this one. This is the probability to finals, and then we'll stick on the Derby and the rest of the data. But this looks at the probability across the 4 levels of open divisions across these events this year. Now, you got to remember that 100X was 4-year-olds only. But all this is showing you is the entries per that level, and then the probability to make their finals. Now, in the Cactus Classic, they didn't have a final, so that was the probability of making the payout. And the Run for the Million qualifier, that was top 10. So because there was only 10 slots that they were getting qualified for. Again, it's a qualified function, and we're going to see the Run for the Million here in another month. Going to be really cool to see. So anyways, it's an interesting piece that kind of shows you where that probability is and where that toughness is, and it's not new news. Run for the Million qualifier, NRBC level 4, and NRHA Derby level 4. And the real question gets to be, is our officiating system being accurate and consistent enough that now purse layout? You got to remember, we had $750,000 in the NRHA Derby in purse in 4 levels. You had just shy of $500,000 in level 4 alone. I mean, it's a
lot.
Oh my word!
Yeah. We talk about that every time we do one of these. It's like, if you'd have told me this 30 years ago, I would have said, "You're crazy. It's not going to happen." And it's, it's like,
right.
it's not going to. Now, are you nuts? Yeah, people win more in a show than you win in a lifetime now. You know what I mean? It was like, it just changed so much. But I think everything is every professional athlete has. It's the same thing happens in the NFL. If you'd have told Terry Bradshaw when he's a quarterback of the Pittsburgh Steelers that they're going to be paid $30 million a year now, he'd have also told you were nuts, right? So anyway, it's interesting. But I don't know. Back to the officiating part of that. Something that you had said earlier about, when I was talking about maybe, having some of those runs reviewed, and you said, we have enough, and this is super important because we've talked about this a lot too. When you said an independent group, which is, that makes huge sense because you avoid any type of conflict. And I think, obviously the Judges Committee is there for a reason. It's very, very important, but there's another thing that happens sometimes. I think people get defensive and you maybe don't get as honest an opinion as you would have with an independent group that would be doing the survey, right? That would be actually doing that.
Right.
I think that was a fantastic point to bring up. That that conflict happens everywhere, and sometimes I think an independent group would be a better choice. And and like I said, sometimes that work is people that are directly involved. It's a good thing.
Yes, and I'm not trying to bring politics in, but it is fundamental science, and the point is that's like peer review. Why do all scientific studies have a peer review? That's an independent function that reviews that work. I chalk it up to, I call it a price of success. Part of our success and our judges committee is nowhere near where we always hoped it would be. The purses are way beyond where we hoped they would be, and the judges committee in particular, it's self-fulfilling. It's political. If you use them as the only source to analyze accuracy, it's self-fulfilling. And are they going to consciously do it? Probably not. But will they subconsciously and reflexively, because their interest is to be defensive? It's to defend and justify. And I think as an industry, we've got to stop that, and we've got to start listening and then looking at how can we make it better, period. And can we make it better? Yes. Do you have to blow it up and recreate it? No. We have a great system. We do. It just needs to advance. And so the committee should really be looking at and doing this kind of work into the future, but they're not. And so that's why it's obvious to me, because you got, those stats that we used for 2023, there was 80 different judges that made up 13 aged events last year. So you can't tell me that if I sent 20 runs to 60 of them, you'd have a great sample coming back. The only thing it takes is you've got to be focused and committed to it. You can't be distracted. And if you do that, then you'd have a great data set coming back. So that's why I bring it up.
Yep. Yes. Good stuff. And I agree 100%. That's
well, we're gonna go back to the Derby. And if you remember when we looked at the go-round, this is the basic stats overview. We have a lot more detail in here, but this is the overview because this is the level 4 finals. Now, there's a couple things that should jump at you. Remember, we were at 85% in the go-round, marked between -half and +half. We're at 63% in the level 4 finals, which tells you the depth of competition automatically stepped up, and it's supposed to. This is not like any overwhelmingly new news. And if you look at using the scale, they step up by 1%. There's 1.1% of all maneuvers in the level 4 finals are getting +1.5. Are they using it enough? I would tell you no. Are they using it consistently across all 5 of the individual officials? I would also again tell you no. It's starting to get used, but they've got to get more comfortable and they got to get more confidence. And it's the piece that you and I talk about, because excellence comes in different forms. And if they try to make the next 1.5 be as good or similar to the last one they just did, which is comparative decision, you won't get there. You got to teach yourself that it's a different form of excellence and then use that. So it's just an interesting piece. And then the same thing's going to be true on penalty and non-unanimous and crossing zero. You had 6% of the runs in the level 4 finals that had non-unanimous penalties applied. And in a $500,000 purse, does it make a difference? The answer is yes. There's no getting around that. So can we get better at that? Because a penalty is a rule infraction. The other one is 11.4%, which is crossing zero. And that's about the standard. And should they have been better prepared and better ready for this set of finals? My answer would be yes, and it appeared that they weren't. Now, did they do as good a work as they could? The answer would be yes. But was it brought in and focused and here you go and here's 35 at the best? That's what it's saying.
Yes, and I agree. And I think that, like I said, I think that there's some, there's ways to prep. I mean, there certainly is, and there's ways to ensure accuracy, and I think that, like I said, an official never goes and sits in that chair with the intention of not being consistent. But I think sometimes that it happens, and I believe that. And I've worked with all kinds. I've judged with all kinds. I've judged with some alphas. I've judged with some judges that were pretty quiet and that didn't say anything and just went on and did their job no matter what happened and didn't get ruffled by anything. And had some that would get their feathers ruffled pretty fast and maybe would have a hard time regaining focus after that. But I always felt like who's ever leading the troops, that's their responsibility to ensure that those guys are accurate, they stay accurate, and they stay consistent. And I think our industry standards certainly have changed in the last few years. I mean, what was a plus half 15 years ago is no longer that, right? I mean, we look at old scored runs that were 225s, and they're not. I mean, they might not make the finals today, right? So, anyway, I think that the numbers that guys and girls are sitting in the chairs marking those horses, if there's not something for them to fall back on that tells them, this is what I did on day one, this is what I did on day two, this is what I did on day three, and here's my industry standards, and I have to make sure that my industry standard plus half on my card is the same at the end of day three as it was day one, or even at the end of the finals, right? I mean, it never bothered me any if my guys had got to their 35 horse finals, guys and girls got to their 35 horse finals, and because those horses fired and they started marking and they were consistent because they didn't have to look at 300, they only had to look at 31 or 32 horses. So I always thought that the finals were easier to judge, just because of the numbers. But sometimes that's not the case too.
Well, yes, and you're 100% correct, because if you look at using the scale, this is again the level 4 finals, but look at the plus half and plus one, and this is measuring all maneuvers in the finals. So, plus half was used 47.2% of the time in 35 runs of an 8 maneuver pattern. Plus one was used 34.9, which is 35%. So that in itself tells you the depth of the finals, and that's not new news. We've been seeing this for 3+ years. It's really about making the fine distinctions on how good, and it's the plus 1.5. And if they don't start getting used to using it to make those fine distinctions, and I can tell you, this is my 20 cents, and you can tell me to, take a fly and hike off the canyon, but in the level 4 finals, there were 2 key spots that were splitting up the fine distinctions between plus 1 and plus 1.5 on a couple of maneuvers. And the first one was the first lead change. That big, fast, left circle, big, fast change leads, right circle, small, slow. That is the most difficult maneuver in the whole sport. That is very difficult. And so could they see it? The answer is yes. Do they have enough tools to be able to make those fine distinctions? I start to question that. We've talked about that a lot. Can we use some more tools? The answer is yes. But again, you've only got what you got. So do you have to make that fine distinction? And then the other piece in this pattern 9 in the finals, was you had 4 rundowns. And it's not the stop and or, whether it's the stop and back up, stop and roll, stop and hesitate. That's where it used to be in that maneuver. It's now in the rundown. And if you went back and studied those horses, you would see very fine distinctions in acceleration, because some would accelerate really fast in 3 or 4 strides and then hit a peak and then go stop and do their stuff. Others, the ones that do it outstanding, are the ones that are continually building all the way to the climax of that stop. And I only say that because everybody can see that. What we're not able to do is have our officials prepped and ready for that kind of stuff in a set of finals. And I would tell you that's what this set of finals showed us. That's what we saw. And the rest of that story on those marks, the plus 1.5, remember that for just a second, because there were, in the finals, there were 15 maneuvers that got a plus 1.5. There was only one maneuver that had 3 judges plus 1.5. It was in a set of spins, kind of like a no duh. All the other plus 1.5s were never done by 2 at the same time. They were done by the batch of judges on a given maneuver, but kind of as standalones. And so, to me, that would be a key area that, again, the committee should be working on, because it has nothing to do with their competence and ability. They're more than capable. It has everything to do with helping them kind of harness it up and on the focal point of where we are. And I think your fatigue factor, as well as your cognitive piece that you were making reference to, because again, you start pouring all that data in there and it'll get messy. What?
And I think that's interesting, and I've got some more things that I'd like to talk about too. But the fatigue factor I talked about, and this doesn't mean that guys are perpetually tired and they struggle. I mean, both you and I've sat in those chairs at 2:00 in the morning, and I would have gladly paid someone the $50 an hour overtime to leave because you don't care. But right. I will tell our viewers that here's a key piece that I used to use. When I would monitor and I would talk to, the judges, and I would say that this information came from an August article in 2011, the ABA Journal, and it was a study done by the Israeli Parole Board on the concept of decision fatigue. And it's a great article, and it's easy to find. You Google it, and it pops right up. But it found that the members of the parole board were more apt to grant parole at the start of the day or after food breaks. And I would liken that to my judges sometimes. In the afternoons, those guys, that's where the perpetual climb always would start, like after lunch. And that would be the time when I would talk about this and about this article, and I would say, guys, hold your line. Remember that. You start to fatigue a little bit, we'll take a break. Whatever, drag break, whatever. But, it's possible, and it's not saying that that's an issue always, but this just tells you that when you're talking about decision fatigue, a lot of times when you make decision after decision after decision, sometimes you can lose focus. And it happens not just in the rain and pen, it happens in the world too. So Anyway, just an interesting piece of information, I thought.
Man, I'll say, how'd you ever find that?
Well, actually,
what would make you go look for the Israeli parole board on research for decisions? That's fascinating in itself.
Yeah, I'll tell you that because I was looking for everything that could possibly deal with judging or officiating or fatigue. I'll go you one better. That's really kind of crazy, but I had a very, very good friend that was an airborne ranger, and he was also a military sniper. And I said, "What in the world, Greg, did you do when you're sitting in one spot and you're tired and you can't move, like a judge sitting in a chair, right?" And he said, "Well, one of the first things that we're taught and what we do is to tickle the roof of your mouth with your tongue when you're fatigued." And I've done that, and it works. So, I'm just looking for anything that could help a judge when you're fatigued. Anyway, that comes from the U.S. military. So anyway, yeah, I looked at every possible angle here. So
right on.
Yeah.
Well, you never published
anyway,
that.
No, never said that. But anyway, that was an interesting piece of information to keep yourself awake instead of pinching yourself. It's like, try that sometime when you're tired. It does work. Right. So. Anyway, but yeah, from the back to the Derby, and back to those guys sitting in the chairs, and I think back to those, did we use the scale? We started to use more plus ones. Absolutely. Did we use it enough? That excellent, like you said, we've talked about excellent a lot of times. It comes in different forms. I think that we can certainly use some more tools. We have those. I know that we've got some great ideas that would help. I think that when you look at each individual official's level of ties that they had after the winter, you can see that the scale wasn't used enough in spots, because you can't jam 5 or 6 horses into your second place through third to fifth to whatever. It's like there's room to separate.
Yeah, and we'll get to that one. But one of the things that I wanted to touch on before we move on quick is because everybody says, I think that this is one of the key areas that NRHA and the sport of reining stepped away from. Because in horse show officiating, we call them judges. And judges make fundamental decisions. They're arbiters. So that's what they do. In sport, you're talking about a decision of who's the best. And in all of horse sports, that's kind of the common reflex, which is that's his or her opinion. I would tell you that in 1985, under John Snoblin and some of those founders, when they created this system, and why this system is one of several reasons of why it's been so revolutionary, is because we shifted and changed, one, the definition, and two, the responsibility. And the point is, if our industry today would start thinking about the officiating scores as a report of what the exhibitor did, we would then move faster, farther, quicker. End of story. It's a report. It's not somebody's, so to speak, opinion. Can we talk about the difference between +1 and +1.5 all day long? But when we're talking about only that difference, now you can have your individual expertise and you're splitting a hair. That's fine. The difference between a +0.5 and a +1.5 in today's sport is distinctly different. That should be a very short conversation because the +0.5 is too conservative, and whether or not the +1.5 was too liberal, to be determined. And you're very true. It's generally in the middle when we see that. So the answer is it's in the middle. So it was really a +1. So the accuracy is there. My point on that whole subject is because you just hear everybody bark all the time, and their justification is, well, that's their opinion, and that's what we hired them for. No, actually, we didn't hire them for their opinion. We hired them for their expert reporting on what the exhibitor displayed. And that's where those two horses in the first 10 of the Derby go-round that make the finals, they were reported accurately and correct. And they went to the finals 300 horses later. That's great work. So I use that as a context. Now, we know that 219 to 221 is where the heart and soul of the aged event is now. And there's a lot of work to do to have that accuracy and consistency carry through. That's the rest of that story.
Yep. No. That's really good stuff.
To take you one more key step, because these are always ones that they're kind of interesting. And they'll show you something. This is penalties. And so what this does is this is the go-round, okay? And this is penalty application, which is the percent of runs. And it's showing you three key things. One, which is the blue on the left, is telling you the percent of runs that had penalties applied, total. The green is penalties that are unanimous. All 5 judges call the penalty. The red is the non-unanimous, and we've been tracking it and marking it. And this is one of mine, and I've been on this one for a long time because I've always disagreed. This is a self-fulfilling false prophecy. Penalties may or may not happen. No, they either do or they don't. And I believe, as a sport, they all should apply it or none of them apply it. And should the officials make that decision? Yes. So all this is doing is tracking, and what you'll see in this as we go across the sport is a very normal trend line, and the trend line is the same, which is non-unanimous penalties are making a difference in final scores, which are making a difference in cut lines, whether you make the finals and whether or not whatever the purse distro is. That's what it's telling you. This is looking at it across the go-round. The top is when you put the whole go-round together. 10% of all runs had a penalty, 2.6% were unanimous, 7.4% were non-unanimous. And you can look at the 3 sections. First section's at the bottom, third section's at the top, and you had 11% of penalties in the first section, 8%, 8.5% in the third section. Were penalties splitting it up? No, because again, they happen or they don't. Are non-unanimous penalties making a distinct difference? And I would tell you the difference between a 222 and a 222.5. I'm not saying of those 14 horses, a penalty is what was causing that. I'm just telling you, you had 14 horses that were half a point right on that cut line. And will a half-point penalty make a difference? The answer is yes, and that's what we're seeing. So that's the piece on the penalty of the go-round. I wanted to show you one other one because this one is the same thing, but it's in the finals. So the two sections of finals, the top graph is the level 4 finals.
Okay. Well, now I couldn't agree more from the penalties being absolute. They either happened or they did not happen. And you have a solution for that. You've told me, and it's fantastic. I will tell you that with the current way that the penalties and major events are handled, it's not a good thing because no one wants to work with someone either from a monitor standpoint or from a judge's standpoint when you have a single judge that calls for review after review after review after review. It's not, I mean, it interrupts the flow. It's not a good thing. And I've had that happen, and I know that you have too. I would say that, when we're talking about a single judge judging a horse show, penalties are absolute. In a one-judge system, it either happened or they did not. If you called that a penalty half, it happened. Everybody gets it, right? But you get into this 3 to 5, 2 to 3 to 5 judge systems, then we have an issue. And I think that you're a technology guy, and you got some great thought, and you're asking yourself if we're using technology to the best of our ability. I do not think that we are. I think there are huge ways to improve it, and I think that that would be a key part of officiating, especially in penalty applications.
And are we? I'm not a technology guy. I'm driven to continue to learn. So I'm trying to keep my mind open and go with the rest of the world. And technology has definitely taken us to these new frontiers. That's true. So I'm just trying to embrace it and use it for what we do. The answer is: are we anywhere near using technology to our best advantage to make fine, hard decisions and hand out thousands of dollars and millions of dollars? And the answer is no. And is it holding us back as a sport and therefore questioning the integrity of our sport? I would say yes, because we're not using all the resources around us to be able to do some of that stuff. And technology is a big one. I think some of the other info, when you made reference to that parole board on decision making, that is a fascinating piece. I'd love to read the whole research study, because there is a significant amount of research and info out there on the human mind and the advanced forms. How do you take experts and make experts even better at what they do? That's a fascinating topic, and there's a lot of science and research on that, which fits right into what we're talking about. We're nowhere near it. And the barriers of the past was that we couldn't afford much. It appears we're beyond that. So it's not about affordability. It's about what are we doing? How do we use them? How do we get ourselves better? And it's not affordability that's keeping us back. So I'm going to show you, because you brought this up, and we are going to pull this together because here comes the rest of the story.
Okay, Paul
Harvey. Yeah. This shows you, this is a colorgram. And this is we've only got the level 4 finals. It would get very busy if I tried to do them all. This is one key example because it's the top of our sport. This is 35 horses in the level 4 finals, all 5 individual cards. And what it colors is 1st through 5th. So the top 5 scores per individual expert. And you'll see their scores are in the white-hand column. The red column is score spreads. So if it's red, it's 2.5 points or more between the 5. And then the green is just showing you the top 10 of that batch. What makes this significant? The funky green is your winner. That was Cade McCutcheon on All Night Partier, and it was obvious by the entire system, by the team of experts. He steps up, he wins it. It was obvious. When you start to look at 2nd, 3rd, and 4th, it's a different story. And all this is showing you is the top 5. So the top 5 out of 35, you're going to hand out $500,000 a purse. And what this is showing you is they didn't see it the same way. They all saw it their unique way. And then you have to put that together and distribute the purse. That's what this is saying. I'm going to show you one more that makes it just a smidgen more clear. And I do have the data points to go with this, but this will clean it up just a touch because this is only showing you the top three. The first, second, and third scores by all five judges and when you put them together. And it begins to let you see it clear, but you're talking about three. You're talking about $500,000 that's going to pay out 35 spots. You have to have a system that can sort out accurately and consistently $500,000 for 35 paychecks. That's what you're after, because I would say 35 is just as important as one. Not the same dollar value, but it's just as important to the breeder, to the owner, to the rider, to the trainer, to the groom, to everybody. And so this is only showing you second and third spot. And what it's exemplifying is the lack of focal point, lack of unanimity amongst the team, which is what you were talking about with them. If you look at their scores, they're in the same batch. It's just who they put in a batch and then how many got bunched up in there. That's what it's showing you. That's just great charted information right there. That is just fantastic. I mean, it's like it's so easy to see. That's remarkable right there. It's great work. That's like you see you laying in bed awake at night trying to think how to chart that stuff where guys like me can understand it. It's like, holy cow, look at that. But yeah, I mean that is a prime example, consistency. And I mean, it's okay. You get to have an opinion when you're an official. I mean, you do. You get to, if you work for the NFL, you get to decide whether or not that was a hold or whether or not was a push off or, what that was and how close was it for you to throw the flag. I mean, you get to have that. You get to have an opinion, but, only to a certain point, right? I mean, because you have somebody looking at that and saying, hey, you missed it or you got it. But, somebody needs to be consistently in a group like this. We've got good enough horses. We've got good enough officiating. We've got good enough ground. We got a second, a third, a fourth, a fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth, ninth, and 10th place horse. And I think that those become easier to separate if we do a better job, I think. Yes.
I mean, instead of tying so many horses on your cards, we give you some more tools. We give you better information. You'll do a better job.
I 100% agree. And again, what do we as an industry bark about? One, it's their opinion. No, it's their expert reporting. Two, it's their chair position. No, there is no good and bad chair position. God, that one just drives me crazy. That one drives me as crazy as crossing zero does to you. But the chair position, that's the biggest piece of hot air there ever was. Every chair has a unique perspective. Are there things seen and not seen uniquely? The answer is yes. Do they have the tools by which they can make those decisions? Yes. Is it going to be the same? No. And that's why the world gets wacky on score spreads. I would tell you that the score spreads have very little to do with anything when you look at it. Where's the accuracy and the consistency? It's in maneuver application and it's in non-unanimous penalties. And because of the depth of our competition now, the non-unanimous is a big deal. And are we paying any attention to that and looking at better ways by which we can be officiating our sport? I question that. So, those are some of the myths that are out there in our industry, and where reining did step out and away from the rest of horse show judging. Those are some of the key areas. And it's that expert reporting, because it says something about what the exhibitor did. If you got a +half on your on your approach, your stop and back up on pattern 9, and 3/4 of your competitors are getting +1 and +1.5, that says something about what you did, not what they did.
Agreed.
And I think the other piece is the standard, because is the standard. Let me just show you this one for fun's sake. This is the data point behind the colorgram of the top 5 scores. And if you just look at that big box right in the middle, because top 5 scores, that should be first, second, third, fourth, and fifth place. And what that's telling you, see those numbers, 13, 13, 8, 14, and 17? That's how many horses were in those 5 spots, which is about tools, that's 1, and 2, it's about fine distinctions. And so that's where there's work to be done, because that's, you're talking about 5. If you talk about between 13 and 17 horses, that is half the finals, is in the top 5 spots. So no, it can't be.
Right.
It can't be, because you got 35 of them. You're going to write 35 checks. So, right?
Without question. Yes, it is. And believe me, that's the whole bottom line, getting the right checks to the right people. That's your job.
Right. Well, that's ultimately our job, its job, the sport's job, the officiating job, to have a real sport. Yes, I completely agree. And I thought that's where we were headed. And now that purses are coming, the economics are changing the industry, and I hope they're changing it for the better.
Right.
Yet to be seen. So
No, I'm really good. I mean, this is so much fun to talk about. Obviously, just because we're both passionate about the officiating, and when we get into a show like this, it's like you could go and talk for hours and hours and hours about what went on, because we're passionate about it. But and I think that from the feedback that we get, there is it's industry wide, because we get so much feedback about when we talk about officiating at these events, and we talk about the scoring system, they like that. So we know that they think along the same lines that we do. Maybe not as intense, but they are thinking the same way for sure.
Yes, and all they've ever wanted was just the pertinent right. It's just the real info. And as an organization and industry and association, are we putting out frequent enough right info, even when we're wrong? No, we're not, and we haven't been. And that's where all they're left to do is interpret. They have to interpret what those scores say, and then try and sort it out with friends and family and colleagues and whatever. And are there many that ever do? Why do most people say, if you go to a judge's seminar, all exhibitors should go to a judge's seminar? They've always said that because at least they got the real info and they understood what officials were trained to look for and how to make those decisions. Great educational format. Do you have to do that in today's time? The answer is no. Is there way more better ways to disseminate information, factual information? Is the industry going to be perfect? No, there's no sport that's perfect. Can we hit excellence? Because that's what always drove us. We were driven to excellence from 1966, and I would tell you we still want excellence today. There's no part of that anybody wants. Does any exhibitor want a check that they're not supposed to get? I don't. My answer would be no, because that's not gratifying to the hard work of everything that a competitor has to do. They want what they earn. And our job on this side of the sport is the officiating. It's to report it. To report it, use experts that can understand degree of difficulty, make very hard fine distinctions, and report it accurately and fairly, consistently. And now we got days and weeks, and so that's the chore, and here we are. And yes, we've got to address the tools too, because we know the top of 0 and the bottom of 0 are distinctly different, but when we put it on a score sheet, it's the same.
All right, without question. And like I said, that's the tool part that we talk about forever. And those like I said, and if the system doesn't change, then the information that is received has to change, because our officials want to know.
Yes.
They want to know. I mean, it's like they want to know what to mark that approach that you talk about. That horse that is excellent in his approach. Well, we know We know how to mark that. But they want to know then what happens if that's an excellent approach and it's a plus half stop and a 0 rollback. They want to know that, right? So you don't have 5 different opinions. They say, okay, well, what is that? Okay, if they ask, what is that?
Yep.
So, but it can't be poor and it can't be good at the same time. So
no. Right,
yeah.
and now we're at the spot of the distinction between how good a good and an excellent are distinctly different. Can they be that at the same time? I'd say no. 4 beats. Is a 4 beat good in a small, slow circle? No, it's not. It's bad. So you got to sort that stuff out. Tail jobs. That's still a conversation. And do we ever, spend any time talking about that? No, we don't. And I would tell you, there's more to that conversation. You got to get a bunch more in there. But, why we even do the tails still fascinates me, because I think as an industry we've gone way beyond it. But I'm sure that there are advanced guys that would probably and the concept of, and I heard this long time ago, because it's the concept of not allowing a horse to learn a bad habit is better than having to fix a bad habit. That's the concept. And so, part of that is now we got life to aged horses. Do we have to do what we used to do in the older days? No. Do we have to go as fast? No. Can we take our time? Yes. Can we develop them better? Yes. Is there more rewards for them? Yes. Can they earn a significant piece in the future? Yes. Those days didn't exist in old times. So I only bring that up because there are common pieces around the competition, and that pleasing to watch is a big piece, because a horse that's intimidated, you're not hiding it at all. And so that's very different than the willingly guided and dictated to completely, and that's been there since 1966.
Absolutely, and there's no question about it. Like I said, I don't want to beat the tail to death, because that's been beat to death over the years like crazy. But I agree with you, and that's another piece of information. It bothers me, bad knockdown tails banging around. It just, I prefer to see a horse even use his tail a little than I do one that is knocked down. But again, our officials don't have the information. What are we supposed to do with that? How much does it affect the maneuver evaluation? Where do we go with it? And until someone says that here's what we're supposed to do with this example, you get 100 different opinions,
Well, correct, which would be similar to a horse not being in lead. And that's not hard to see either. And that's a fascinating recent conversation, because when they do the bunny hop, they're out of lead. So, period. Yes, those are all the things that that's where we are, and it's the fine distinction. So it's going to be interesting to see. We're halfway through the year, but not quite halfway through the aged events. So it's not going to get easier. I know that much. The pressure's going to stay up, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And like I said, we've got the youngins coming, which we'll get to here in just a second. But man, oh man, I mean, with the old ones, the young ones, it's woo. I mean,
yeah.
So
that's what you're talking about with the young ones. It's the futurity season.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah, it's going to be coming soon. Well, we hope you've enjoyed this show. If you got any questions, go to cowboyoffice.com. Drop us a note. We're happy to address it. Put it into a show. We'll return it direct. And until we see you next time, enjoy the ride.
Absolutely. Yep. And until we see you the next time, thanks for watching. Stay in the middle.
Today's episode is brought to you by 4D Productions in cooperation with the Consultment Agency, a full-service agency that helps bring forward-thinking equine brands into the 21st century using digital skills and services such as website development, graphic design, social media, and media production such as the podcast you're consuming here today. Thank you so much for riding along with us today. Sign up at cowboyoffice.com to be the first to know about topics affecting the industry we love so much. You can reach out to us with topics you care about by finding us on TikTok, Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube, and all podcast platforms. And remember, share this episode with someone that may enjoy it, because the more we can share our horses with others, the better our world will be.